Right? How can you? I help? I think
Gotta be the loopback one.
so. This one.
It's the media USB loopback. Yes.
This one. And it says it's on.
Right. Oh, that is.
And it's like,
People.
what is this one? There's two loopbacks. This one, which I don't think it is.
Should not be that one.
That's not it. Has to be this. Sorry. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Well, good evening. Good evening. My name is Mayor Mike Wickers. Today is Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. This is the Cottonwood Heights City Council business meeting. Thank you for coming. We are going to begin tonight. I have asked our Director of Community and Economic Development, Mike Johnson, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Mike. Item 3.0 on our agenda is a citizen comment period. I only have one speaker as of now. Let me have John Kennington come on up. John, you'll have 3 minutes and state your name again and speak into the microphone. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This kind of reminds me of that NPR program that's sometimes recorded in front of an audience of absolutely no one. Excuse me, I'm disappointed. My name is John Kennington and I live on Pippin Drive in Apple Valley, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment tonight. Tonight, I'd like to comment on the city's apparent involvement in the discussions surrounding UDOT's considerations with regard to the Highway 210 EIS, decisions upon which are due soon. Okay. To begin with, there are many residents here that are vehemently opposed to the Gondola B alternative being considered for Little Cottonwood Canyon for many reasons. For example, it's too expensive to build and ride for servicing just 2 businesses in the canyon. And it will ruin the narrow canyon's view shed, one of the crown jewels of our backyard to which we are a gateway. But most importantly, the decisions coming down with the EIS will significantly impact the nature of this city itself. That is the proposed location of the gondola's bottom terminal and its surrounding area near Lakai in the south, and to the design of Wasatch Boulevard all through the east side of the city, and that of the future gravel pit at the north end. We will be impacted like nowhere else. And Cottonwood Heights should be in the thick of these discussions. Besides a few resolutions, not many people know the city's stand on these issues. The city should partner with surrounding cities to form a unified response to these issues if possible. Do outreach with our citizens to poll them for their preferences and keep them informed, and talk to the decision makers on the project to make sure our preferences are known. Okay, and also on a different subject, I'm also opposed to the proposed changes to the sensitive lands ordinance, okay, that the Planning Commission is considering. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. So let me just add that the city has taken a position on the gondola, and we have recommended to UDOT that that we not do the gondola. So the city's position is current as an enhanced busing option. We actually meet with UDOT monthly and try to stay on top and have had really good discussions, and they understand where our citizens and where the city stands at the current time. So. Thank you, John. With that, I do not see anybody else online, and the other person here I don't see standing up. So with that, I will close the citizen comment period. We have Item 4.0 is our legislative action items, and we will begin with consideration of resolution 2022-23, adopting a tentative budget for the period of July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2023, providing for public inspection of such budget, establishing the time and place of a public hearing to consider adoption of such budget, and providing for public notice of such hearing. We are going to have our Administrative and Fiscal Services Director, Scott Jurgis, present to us now.
Sorry, scrolling back up to the top. Okay. All right, so this budget is the tentative budget that we're presenting to you. It doesn't mean that it's the final budget by all means. This is the budget that goes on display for our residents and for other concerned parties so that they can review it, comment on it, communicate their comments back to either city staff or to you as elected officials so that we can refine it if need be between now and final adoption so that we can get that taken care of and try and reflect, everything that we can, possibly have in our mind that might need to be reflected in this budget as we move forward. This budget has a few things that are in here as estimates still, such as our property tax rate, that we will not have our final property tax rate and final revenue amount until after around June 10th area, when we get that. And so we will publicize that, and I'll highlight a couple more items that we're kind of waiting for some final feedback on. We finished this draft last week. It changes from what we had talked about in our work session I guess, was it 3 weeks ago now? Two weeks ago. We are highlighted in yellow because we did go over quite an extensive presentation in our work meeting a couple weeks ago. This budget, once it's adopted, will be on display on our website, and Lindsay will get that out and on all the different feeds that we have, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, so that everybody can be directed to it. We will be able to print copies for people if somebody wants a hard copy of it. We're finding more and more people just look at it electronically. So this is a write-up that of the budget. The tentative budget was developed through a collaboration of meetings that we held with. We started with the council retreat in January of this year. We moved through discussions with our different department directors. We had discussions with our benefits and compensation subcommittee, and also with the budget subcommittee. And this is kind of the product of all those discussions up until now that we know that we're heading down towards. Again, nothing in here is final, but I think it's a pretty good representation of where we stand right now. In terms of our general fund, so the city has 5 funds, the general fund being the main fund of the city, where probably 99% of our revenue flows through this fund. The only revenue that really doesn't flow through this fund is revenue associated with, say, a grant for a particular capital project. That would be about the only thing that wouldn't flow through this fund. But every other revenue flows through this fund and then is transferred to other funds to finance the activities that the city participates in. So in our general fund, we expect to have an ending fund balance for the current year that we're in. So this is looking forward to June 30th of this year of about $8.5 million. And that reflects an increase of about $585,000 from the beginning fund balance. And it's about $2,665,000 better than our current adopted budget. And I'll kind of go through some of the reasons for that. That $8,513,000 would represent 33% of our budgeted revenues, and we're limited by state statute we're required by state statute to hold a minimum of 5%. City ordinance requires an additional 1%, bringing that to a total of 6%, or $1.5 million that we need to hold. And then there's a reserve for compensated absence of just under $600,000, and that amount, we true that up each year, but that's where it is right now. So that would leave of this about $6,376,000 available for appropriation. Just back here on this, we're about $2,665,000 better than our current year budget. And the main reason for that is our sales tax revenues are much higher than originally anticipated. And so that's the thing to keep in mind with that one. We had initially kept them quite blunted due to uncertainties associated with COVID, and they've actually come in quite strong through the year. So revenues, property taxes, we're budgeting those at $8,203,000, and this includes an estimated new growth of $50,000. This is just an estimate. Like I said before, on and around June 10th, we'll get the final new growth revenue. That's a calculated number provided to us by the county auditor, and that's associated with valuations as of January 1st of this year, and they go through and do their magic on it and come up with what the individual property tax rates and revenues and everything for every city in the county, and so on and so forth. The current certified tax rate is 0.001740, and that will be updated to reflect a new certified tax rate, likely at a lower rate. We know that property values are going up, and so as property values go up, the tax rate goes down so that we, in a sense, collect the same amount of money each year. Sales taxes, again, like I said before, we had set our sales tax revenue at $7.2 million in about, this number came about in about March or April of last year, so about a year ago. And that turned out to be a little overly cautious. As a matter of fact, last year, we received almost $7.9 million. So we're actually anticipating that we'll receive about $8.5 million in our current year, which you can compare back here is quite a bit better than $7.2 million. So moving forward, we're going to estimate about $8,800,000 in our next fiscal year, the budget year that this represents. So that would be about a $300,000 increase over what we are currently projecting. We still feel that that's a conservative estimate. It's not showing any, huge decreases, but it's probably on average outside of the last 2 years, about an average increase. 300 to 350,000 would be about an average increase for the 5 years outside of the last 2. County option sales tax, we're recommending $650,000, and this is a voter approved sales tax to be utilized for transportation projects. Energy use tax is taxes on power and gas, and that's estimated to be at $2.2 million. Fee in lieu of property tax, this is the fee that you pay on your vehicle when you license it, and so it's more of an age-based fee versus an actual value fee, and that's estimated to be $425,000, and that fee is more or less set by the state of Utah. We just get to participate in it in terms of our collections. Franchise taxes, this is related to cable TV. It's budgeted at $300,000. That's about $10,000 less than our current budget. That tends to drop each year as people go to, other forms of getting their entertainment and so on and so forth, but doesn't tend to grow for us. Transient room tax. This is the tax that's applied, an additional tax that's applied to a room that's rented. Any short-term rental will have transient room tax added to that with the completion of the new hotel up in the Canyon Center. That's increased this. It's about a $65,000 increase over our current budget, but more in line with what we anticipate collecting for this fiscal year. We're not going to be doing and currently do not do a telecom franchise tax. We're the only city in the valley that does not do that. If we did implement that, it would be about $350,000. We'd need to true that up and everything, but we're not planning to do that. So all of these tax type changes reflect a total of about $2,005,000 over the current year budget. And it's about a 10.7 overall increase, predominantly influenced by that $1.6 million shift from 7.2 million up to 8.8 million in sales tax revenues. $250,000, you know, as I've already talked about, you know, the other variety of changes. Uh-huh. Yes, it's just our portion. Yeah. The county also receives a portion that goes to their track fund that they utilize for various projects. And we benefit a little bit from that when they give us some grants from that project, from that fund that they have. But yeah, that's just our local portion for our municipality. Yes. And it's just from the hotels in our municipality. We don't have a ton of hotels. We're not like, say, Salt Lake City that has a ton of hotels there. Class C roads funds. This is the per dollar or per gallon of fuel purchased. There's a tax that goes with that. And this is our share of that. It's projected to be about $1,250,000 coming in this year. So that's what we're anticipating there. And then we are in receipt of a net of $4 million, but this, our final payment on the American Rescue Plan Act state and local fiscal recovery funds of $2,02,670. We anticipate that to come in about July. Not sure the exact timing. It flows through the state of Utah and then to us, but that will come in and, excuse me, we can utilize that in a number of different ways, and that will be reflected through the budget. So total revenues budgeted is just under $26 million, and that represents an increases of about $4 million from prior. A lot of that is that American Rescue Plan Act, you know, and then an overall 8.1 overall increase. So talking about expenditures. So we'll start with our employee compensation changes. So currently, and back, if you remember last October, some of you were here and some of you just heard about it, but we adopted a police market adjustment in October that was effective October 1st of last year. That adjustment was for $484,000, and it was triggered by pretty much every municipality along the Wasatch Front doing quite large changes to police compensation in an effort both to compensate fairly and to retain police personnel, our sworn police personnel.
I don't think your microphone's on.
Just a point of clarification. So that to 484,000 in October, it's appearing as an expense in this next year's budget. Is that an annual, or I'm not quite understanding why that expense is?
Okay, so what happened last year is, since it only was into effect for 3/4 of the year, 75% of the year, we only put in 75% of the dollars needed for that. The annual impact was 484,000. We only put in 363,000 into the budget because that's only the period of time that would be paid out. For the current year, it will be paid out for the full year, you know, because that's built into the base budget for police employees. And so what we need to add in 121,000 so that we have the full amount to be able to pay that. That's, if you will, we committed those funds back when we implemented that, and we talked about that aspect of it at the time, where we would need to add that final 121,000, if you will, to make the budget whole to be able to pay that out. It'd be like, you know, if you were looking at your personal budget, if you had, you know, if you're a calendar year, if you added a cost in that was going to be $10 a month starting in July, you'd incur about $60 worth of cost for the rest of that budget year. But in the next year, you'd incur $120,000 worth, or sorry, $120 of cost as that went out for 12 months. And so your budget would look like it increased by 60,000, but you really did that when you committed to that new expense back in July of the prior year. So that's kind of what we're doing, is we're just making the budget whole for that decision that was made back in October.
Thank you.
excuse me, so the COLA, the COLA is a cost of living allowance. And this has been traditionally based on the national CPI index for the calendar year ending in December of the year prior to where we are. That amount was 7% for December 2021. So we have a placeholder in here of 7%, that would be 648,000. And that is just a placeholder. This has not been formally decided by either the Compensation and Benefits Committee, nor has it been ratified by you all in terms of what that will be. So this amount could change based on your decisions and what direction you give to us. But that is in here as a placeholder of 7%. So if that changed up or down, it would be either an increase in cost or a decrease in cost, depending on what decisions are made with that. The merit increase. So the merit increase is what progresses somebody along in whatever range they have. If their range of pay is from, $40,000 to $50,000 and they're currently being paid at say $44,000, it's what moves them along in that range to maybe $45,000 or whatever it happens to be. But the merit increase, the average is about 3.62% for those that are within the range. There are some that are already at the top end of that range that wouldn't be eligible for that increase. So when you take all employees into account, the average is closer to 2.5%. Excuse me. And again, that's to represent growth in knowledge, longevity, and what have you of people who are progressing through their career stage. The cost of that is about $201,000. Our health cost, we have an increase of 8% in this budget. There initially, it was proposed to be a 19% by our insurer. That would have been a $148,000 increase. We pushed back on that, had them go and reevaluate a couple different things. We could have done it with about a 12% increase, retaining the same out-of-pocket costs and deductible costs, out-of-pocket maximum and deductible costs. However, we asked them to look at some alterations to that, and with some slight alterations, we were able to get it to an 8% increase. That 8% increase reflects at $68,922 for that. And health insurance and dental cost has no change recommended due to reduced or low utilization by employees. It falls into their estimates that they have. Utah retirement systems, there's a very small downward adjustment in terms of the rate for non-sworn employees. And that's 0.5% downward adjustment. And that saves us about $16,000 when we spread that through all the employees. So, and then year over year, we do have some turnover. And as you have turnover, there's always changes in terms of the amount of money that you need. We had a small decrease in the amount of money that we needed of $2,813. Sometimes I can't say the small numbers. I'm used to talking in hundreds of thousands and millions, and these small numbers kind of trip me up a little sometimes. So total employee cost changes and add up to $1,020,000 from an additional from the current budget year that we are in. Excuse me. So other costs, I'll call them operational costs that we need to have. Throughout here, we get a lot of requests that come in. Not all requests are recommended to be funded. Also, departments do look at their budget, and if they have a decrease of say $2,000 that they can put into effect, but then they have maybe an increase of $5,000 for something that they need, they'll net those together and say, oh, I'll only need $3,000 to accomplish this thing, that whatever it is that we're trying to do. So we're not always real good at telling that story of when we do those internal, looks and savings in our budget, but we're trying to be a little bit better with that and try to reflect some of the items in this. So we'll try and highlight those as we go forward. Elections, we removed $45,000 from our elections because we only have to pay for municipal elections every other year. So we were able to pull that out for this year. City attorney costs, we have estimated inflationary increases of about $15,000. For municipal court costs, there's an estimate of about $20,000 that's needed for increased prosecuting attorney costs over there. In the mayor and council budget, there's 25,000 for travel and training, mainly for National League of Cities conference, but they could also be used for other conferences if not everybody was going to that particular conference. Legislative committees, $1,000 increase for the Youth City Council. They're seeing some cost increases in some of the things that they traditionally participate in. In events, we're asking to add 6,600 back to Butlerville Days, and that's to account for some cost increases that they're also seeing and some of the things that they're bringing in. They do try to get as much as they can, some revenue offsets for some of the things that they do, and they do a very good job at that, but it's hard to predict what's going to happen with that moving forward. In the city manager budget, there are $30,000 to cover some employee range adjustments, $5,000 to cover some yard cleanup for some code issues that maybe when somebody doesn't want to be very compliant with some of the issues with their yards.
That 30,000 range adjustment, that's outside of the general COLA and merit?
That is. In the finance, let's see. Oh, and records, culture, and HR, there's a FTE change from a part-time position to a full-time position, and that's going to be paid from a grant. So I just wanted to note that it will be a 0.5 change in FTE in our FTE grid that we put out, but there's no net cost to the city. That's being paid for from a grant. Excuse me, finance and IT, these are actually all IT costs, $97,000. 58,000 is some cybersecurity enhancements that were discussed in detail during multiple meetings, but they're all cybersecurity related to get us to a higher level of security, and also to be, I'll use the term in compliance with, but better in compliance with, because it's not that we weren't in compliance, but just better in compliance at a better level of compliance with cybersecurity standards that are out there now. 39,000 for inflationary costs related to software and hardware, and that's really 54,000 less 15,000 that was able to be saved throughout other areas in the IT budget. City Hall maintenance, currently we don't have changes recommended and reflected in here. We just found out today we will have some savings related to the solar panels that they've been putting on this building. Probably around 26,000 annually. We will firm that up and bring that back when at some point in time before we adopt the final budget, and put something in there so that will reflect that. Community economic development, they had a net reduction of $13,000. That's made up of a $15,000 reduction in contracted services related to the general plan, and then an addition of $2,000 for some training related increases that they have. In the police budget, we have an increase of 128,100, and that's made up of fuel cost projections being higher at $50,000. The VEC Versaterm dispatch fees we've included at 41,000, and just found out yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, yesterday that will probably be closer to 29,000. So we'll watch that over the next day or two, and we will get you a final number on this before we adopt. Police wellness program, $19,000. DARE funding that used to be covered by a grant, $4,000. Several of their software subscriptions that are just directly related to police, $10,300. Alexa Pulse. Yeah.
Is the DARE funding, whoa, that's the officers from our police department go over into the schools and conduct the DARE. So is there a annual fee to be a member of DARE, or do you mind just educating me on that?
You want to do it, Chief?
Sure. The DARE program used to be funded out of grants, and then they dried up. And so all the things that go along with the DARE program, the officer we pay for, but there's the t-shirts, the workbooks, the pencils, those little kind of things add up. And we've been taking that money out of different funds that we had, because there was no way, there was no money in a budget to pay for DARE. So what this does is allow me to have a budget item so I can buy those things and we can track them better out of, so we know where we're spending the money instead of pulling it, say, out of police uniforms, you know, or out of a ammunition bucket, but that we know where it's coming from, so. but
And the
no,
school district does reimburse us about 85,000 a year for both the DARE officers and the other school resource officers that are in the schools. So,
Thank you.
And
That's,
just so you know that DARE is copyrighted, so anything you buy that says DARE on it probably costs more than you would think.
thank you.
we'll have to have the fair program there. I don't know. So Lexapol subscription and some iPhone or Lexapol subscription and to run Lexapol on the iPhones, and it also includes a training component. And this is an $8,500 increase. The Axon redaction software, this is related to the body camera videos and things that we have so that the videos can be redacted. Diversity and de-escalation training, additional $7,500. And then this is one thing that we wanted to highlight is there wasn't a request of $140,400 that were not recommended at this point in time. And that includes $120,000 for a mental health police officer that wasn't recommended at this time, but we will continue to monitor and feed data back to you so that if we ever decide that warrants and needs the funding, we can address that. And then some equipment items totaling $20,000. Some of these we're going to make an attempt to purchase out of the current year budget with some under expend that we're going to incur. We'll see how much of that we can take care of, but those are one-time purchases. So we're trying to address that way. Ordinance enforcement increase for veterinary and shelter costs $5,000. Emergency management increased of $6,300. And this is because we have our command post. Unfortunately, the tires, we don't wear them out, but they get old and sun rotted. And so they need to be replaced periodically. And we're at that point in time when we need to replace that. And there's some software that they utilize for when we do have emergency management that we need to update. Fire increases, we have a placeholder in here of $354,000, and that's an 8% placeholder. And fire hasn't yet finalized their budget, but when they finalize their budget, this could either stay the same or go down. I don't know exactly where that's going to go at this point in time. Public Works has a net change of $20,326, and that's made up of a reduction of $83,000 and an increases of $103,000. So we have added a little bit more detail in here from last time, and that's equipment operations costs of $326, and then traffic calming radar signs, net of other reductions of $20,000 on that. And then they did ask for an additional FTE, which is a right-of-way technician that was not recommended at $63,336. Excuse me, that was not recommended at this time. So overall expenditures in the general fund are $20,562. So that's an increase of about 1.7 million. Of that, if you remember, our personnel costs were about $1,020,000, and then the fire increase is about $354,000. That's largely going to be employee related. So between those two costs, that's the lion's share of the cost increases that we've got built into the budget. There's kind of a quick summary of those costs right there. The transfers out of the general fund, as I mentioned before, most of our revenues flow into our general fund, and we need to transfer money out to cover our capital costs and other needs that we have. So we're transferring out $2.7 million to our capital projects fund to fund public works related capital projects. And we'll go through those expenditures down below when we get to that fund. $1,029,000 to our capital projects fund from the American Rescue Plan Act. And this is going to go towards our public works building. Total capital projects fund transfer would be $3.7 million, almost 3.8. Debt service fund, $1,826,000, and that's spread up between land and building at $1,177,000, police vehicles at $338,000, public works vehicles at $310,000, and that makes up that 1.8 million. and this does not reflect the new public works vehicle lease or police lease that are talking about in our work meeting and also later today, that's going to be reflected in the next budget out. So our stormwater fund has 1,028,000 transferred in, 200,000. That's the ongoing transfer in there to be added to the fee, so that there's a net of $1.6 million that will be available there. And then a one-time transfer of 828,000 to fully fund the Keswick Road Stormwater Project. So the overall impact in the general fund is a use of fund balance from a budget perspective of $1,222,200. So the budgeted ending fund balance would be $1,291,000. This does not capture any of our under expend. I believe that under expend will push that closer to $8 million. So that would be 28% of our budgeted revenues. And by the time you take out the amounts that we hold, the 6% for the city, which would be about 1.5 million, and then our estimated compensated absences, it would leave about $5 million available for appropriation at the end of the budget year. Like I said, that will probably be closer to $6 million by the time we capture under expend. Not sure exactly where, but somewhere in that range. Capital Improvements Fund. So this fund is projected to have just under $100,000 beginning balance available for appropriation. The transfers, again, like I outlined before, from the city is made up of a number of dollars. One to come in there, which basically is $2.7 million. Excuse me. To go in there. Sorry, I'm getting a dry throat. And then American Rescue Plan Act, state and local fiscal recovery funds of about $1,029,000 to go towards the public works building. And then the new lease for the police and public works light duty vehicles. So we'll need to pay for the upfront costs of those vehicles, $2.7 million combined. And then $214,500 in revenue that's directly related to a grant for corridor preservation. And so we have that revenue come directly here into here. And then 25,000 is our estimate for interest revenues. From an expense standpoint, 2.7 million for public works related capital improvements. So street funding at 2,245,000. Sidewalk projects of 455,000, including 1700 East, 2700 East, some ADA ramps, sidewalk 50/50 program, and then some hazard mitigation funds in there. A couple of fence projects at about $50,000 total. And then we will need to rebudget, as I was going over in the other meeting. We have projects that we just can't finish before the budget year's out. And so we need to rebudget the remaining amount. We'll bring that to you in September, October kind of time frame and detail what that is. But we won't know that until it gets a little closer. Corridor preservation grant, again, we'll need to budget the expense to go along with that revenue, $214,000. And then the police and public works light duty vehicles, there's the expense to go with the revenue that comes in from that lease. And then the public works building will add that $1,029,000 to the budget that will go in there. So that leaves a total expenditure, new expenditures in our in our capital projects fund of $6.7 million. So that would leave us with an increase of our fund balance of 25,000, and that's basically the interest that we earn in there each year. So that would leave us with about $121,000 available. So if we had some smaller capital needs that came up through the year, we would be able to take care of them out of funds that are already available in this budget. The Stormwater Fund is a new fund that started about a year ago now in June of 2021. This one is predominantly funded by the $7.50 per month per ERU, which is equivalent residential unit that's associated with that. That brings in some funds, and then we try to have about $500,000 in there at any given time that's not appropriated. So if we have an emergency repair come up, we can take care of that. Currently, our Stormwater Fund is projected to have about a $230,000 net ending fund balance for the year. So the revenues generated by that stormwater fee is about $1.4 million. And then there are transfers. There we go. Transfers, again, of the 200,000 from the general fund, that brings that net total between the 1.4 here and this 200,000 to about 1.6 that's available for general ongoing projects. And then we're transferring in 828,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act, state and local fiscal recovery funds to fund that Keswick Road stormwater project. So the net expenditures, again, are some operational and maintenance costs of about 674,000. That includes about 615,000 in personnel costs, 35,000 for curb and gutter repairs, 35,000 for some cross gutters where we need to take the water from one side of the street to the other, 594,000 for flushing out stormwater manholes and inlets and raising some buried storm drain manholes, and then the 828 for the Keswick Road stormwater project. So the overall impact to the stormwater fund balance would be an increase of that 232,000, and that will push our ending fund balance to $500,000 that would be available at the end of the year, which is our target, if you will, to hold that, and just in case we have a project that comes through. The CDRA fund, this fund now is starting, it will be in our second year of tax increment financing related to the Canyon Center project. We anticipate to get about 584,000 in property taxes. That will change based on whatever the actual collections are, and the county auditor will let us know what that is at some point in time, usually about March or April of next year. And then we'll anticipate maybe $10,000 of interest on fund balance that's in there. Again, we typically incur some small charges related to professional fees on the different projects in there. So we have 10,000 for that. And then we will have to distribute that 584,000 that's related to the Canyon Center project based on the agreements that we have in place with the various taxing entities. And so we'll do that as we go through that year. So that would leave us with the same amount of 1,358,000. And that amount is associated with the Fort Union and the Cottonwood Corporate Center redevelopment areas. So,
and if I may just say, as we talked about in the work session, in the documents that we get out, we'll break out those two areas and the funding amounts tomorrow morning on that document that we talked about in the work session. So.
The debt service fund currently has about $673 in fund balance that's available at the beginning of our, or at the end, sorry, of our fiscal year. So there's also $13 million that's in there in escrow funds, and those escrow funds exist from when we did our refunding bond in October. We were able to refund that, but some of the call dates on our 2014 and 16 bonds aren't until 2024. So we're holding those funds in escrow. That ends up actually saving us quite a bit of money as we go through that process, about $85,000 a year, so it was a good thing, but those funds are held in escrow until we can actually pay for those bonds. Expenses, we got $3.7 million. So we've got our police vehicle lease. We've got the police vehicle lease payoff, and this money comes from the sale of our existing police fleet. We have our public works vehicle lease, and this is the public works non-light duty vehicles. So this is the snow plows and the heavier duty trucks that they have. The building bonds that are paid for from the general funds transfer, this would be the remaining 2014 and 16 bond costs, and then a little bit of the 2021 bond costs, $1.1 million. And then there are some funds that are from the 2014 and 16 bonds that are paid for by escrow, and that's $545,000. And then we just always put in about 500,000 of miscellaneous. One year we got surprised by a little adjustment in there, and we don't want to get surprised by an adjustment. It was like $200. Revenues and transfers in. So we have a transfer in of 1.8 million, and that's to cover most of the police vehicle cost, the public works vehicle cost, and then the buildings cost there. And then there's interest on some escrow funds. And then there's proceeds from the sale of the existing police fleet. And then again, we put in a miscellaneous $500 in there. That's to basically offset that. So in the end, the debt service fund would have a decrease of about 285,000 in the escrow funds. And then this will push the available fund balance to that same $673 at the end of the year. So in summary, there's a couple things we need to keep in mind. One is we need to finalize the COLA amount before we adopt the budget. So we get the final amount in there, but we do have 7% in here. So if we maintained at 7%, there wouldn't be a change. If we went up, it would be an increase in cost. If you went down, it would be a decrease in cost. In terms of that, and we'd have to calculate those costs. And then the UFA contract price could have an adjustment based on how they adopt that out, and we'll get that information. As I mentioned before, there will be a slight adjustment to the VEC contract, about what, $11,000-$12,000, something right in there. Is that right?
About 15,000,
15?
close to a little under 15,000.
Okay, so about 15,000, a decrease that we would anticipate putting in here. And then we will also, around June 10th, we'll get our final certified tax rate and our property tax revenue. So there are a few minor things that we're expecting some adjustments in as we can move forward, but we feel that this is a pretty good document at this point in time. And then there are also some additional pages, and let me just kind of come down. There's a overall fund summary that takes each fund, takes the beginning balance, the revenues, the expenditures, transfers in or out, projected ending fund balance, the change in the fund balance, projected, fund balance restrictions, if there are any restrictions for any reason, and those restrictions are detailed out down here. And then the unrestricted remaining fund balance. So you can kind of see all the details. And then all of this is reflected in more detail. The first 4 pages that look like this are our general fund, 2 pages of revenue and 2 pages of expenses. And then there's our capital projects fund. And then that's 2 pages. And then we have our debt service fund, that's a single page. And then we have our CDRA fund, that's a single page. And finally, we have our stormwater fund, that's a single page. And so those are all the things that are going to be included in this packet so that people can take a look at it, yourselves included. I look at it a lot to make sure that I haven't screwed up. I find things every once in a while here and there where I go, oh, whoops, didn't run that number over very good. And so I have to make little adjustments here and there. But I think it's a pretty good representation of where we need to be, and reflects, wishes and desires of what we've heard from each of you. So any questions?
Well, thank you, Scott. Note that was very informative. I mentioned before, we're blessed to have your expertise. I would like to add and put formally on the record, if you watch this presentation, all of the inflationary pressure in almost every expense. I don't know if there wasn't one that didn't go up, and I'm happy to state that we will not be raising any taxes this year to cover those. I am in meetings weekly with other cities. The League of Cities Executive Director mentioned that he thought it would be around 50% of cities going to tax and to raise taxes this year. So we are blessed as a city that we will not be raising taxes even with pressures that are coming at us at once. So any other questions or comments from the council? Hearing none, I will now entertain a motion to approve resolution 2022-23, adopting a tentative budget for the period of July 1st through June 30th, 2023. Providing for public inspection of such budget, establishing the time and place of a public hearing to consider adoption of such budget, and providing for public notice of such hearing.
I move that we approve resolution 2022-23 and make the hearing like again on
May 17th, yes.
And I'll second that motion.
We have motion to approve
We're
from
mandated by law to adopt this today.
motion to approve from Councilmember Bracken and a second from Councilmember Peterson. I will, hearing no other questions or comments, I will call for the vote. Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Newell,
Yes.
Councilmember Burrell.
Yes.
I will vote yes.
To do by certain dates and budget.
Okay, the next item on our agenda tonight is consideration of resolution 2022-24, declaring police canine flex surplus and authorizing sale to Officer Trey Brimhall. I will have Chief Russo just give us a brief explanation.
Sure. Officer Brimhall has been with the department for about 4 years. He's assigned to our canine unit and has a dog named Flex, which is, or who is a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois. Officer Brimhall is quitting and going into a private business venture with his family. And in doing so, those officers who are assigned to canine, as you may or may not know, live with those dogs 24/7. And they have to, and they develop a strong bond with those dogs as people do with their pets. Normally, this is a little different because they're just not just a pet, they are their partner, and they take them into, darkened alleys and buildings, and they are the protectors of the officers, and they will give their lives for those officers. So the bond is very strong, and the officer and his family would be devastated if they couldn't take the dog with them. Yet the dog is a tool and as a value to the city. So at the request of the officer, we've made this proposal to you to sell the dog to Officer Brimhall for the cost of $10,500. That number is, we got that number because that is what the cost of a replacement dog would be. So it seemed reasonable and fair. We've already been shopping for dogs, and the number is $10,500. And the officer is willing to take possession, resolve us a liability, and provide a check to the city. I will also tell you that that original dog was not bought with city money. That was bought with donations. And so we are recovering that money for the city because it's appropriate to do so. And we would support this resolution and ask you to do the same.
Thank you, Chief Russo. Any other questions or comments from the council? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve resolution 2022-24, declaring police canine flex surplus and authorizing sale to Officer Trey Brimhall.
I move to accept resolution 2022-24.
I'll second that, Mayor.
We have a motion to approve from Councilmember Newell and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I will call for the vote. Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Newell,
Yes.
Councilmember Burrell,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Next item is 4.3, consideration of resolution 2022-25, awarding a retiring police officer his badge and approving his purchase of a police firearm. Chief Russo. Again.
Officer Steve Olson has been with the Cottonwood Heights Police Department since 2008 when we started. And prior to that, he served 28 years with the Salt Lake City Police Department for a total of 42 years in public service as a police officer. He is chosen to retire, and in doing so, we would ask you to allow us to award his badge that he has obviously earned given his service and his firearm at a nominal price, which we normally do, two officers who retire in good standing with the police department in recognition for all their many years of dedicated and honorable service to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Russo. I would also like to thank Officer Olson for his dedicated service to our city. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2022-25, awarding a retiring police officer his badge and approving his purchase of a police firearm.
Move that we approve resolution 2022-25 and thank Officer Olson.
I'll second that.
Motion to approve from Councilmember Bracken and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, well, I'll call for the vote. Councilmember Newell,
Yes.
Councilmember Burrell,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Okay, next item is item 4.4, consideration of resolution 2022-26, approving entry into a lease purchase agreement with Zions Bank Corporation for the lease of police and public works vehicles and associated equipment, and authorizing the execution and delivery of all related documents and the taking of all required actions. I would like to actually mention at this time, I am an employee of Zions Bank. This resolution is actually working through the public works or the public finance department of Zions Bank, of which I am not a part. I work in treasury management, so it's a completely different division, but I wanted to state that before we move forward on this resolution. We discussed this item earlier in our work session. Are there any other questions or comments from the council at this time? Hearing none, I will now entertain a motion to approve resolution 2022-26.
I motion to approve resolution 2022-26.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to approve from Councilmember Burrell and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will call for a vote. Councilmember Burrell,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Newell,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Okay, our last legislative item on our agenda tonight is a consideration of resolution 2020-27, approving entry into a vehicle repurchase option agreement with Garf Enterprises, Inc. for police and public works vehicles and associated equipment. We also discussed this item earlier in our work session. Are there any other questions or comments from the council?
No, this is very important and integral to the way our lease work, being able to have a set cost at the end of that, know exactly how much we're financing. I would move approval of resolution 2020-20.
I'll second.
But it 2022-27, we'll fit,
I'll second that
we'll
one.
get the typo fixed.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve resolution 2022-27 from Councilmember Bracken and a second from Councilmember Newell. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will now call for the vote.
Could we get the interest rate for the 2020?
That would be great. It was quite a good.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Newell,
Yes.
Councilmember Burrell,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Okay, the last item for us this evening is approval of our consent calendar, which are the minutes for our meetings on April 19th. Could I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
We have a motion to approve from Councilmember Newell and a second from Councilmember Burrell. Let's proceed with a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That concludes the items on our agenda this evening. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
I would do that, but I'm feeling a little bit.
That's why I didn't second the last thing, Scott.
Well, I'll move that we adjourn our city council meeting.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion to adjourn from Councilmember Bracken and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Mike, we didn't make 7:15, 7:20, but we came close. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.